Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please, if you can have a seat. You know, in the section this morning regarding the R&D, you know, we talk about this complex system of R&D, in particular the commercial activity, commercial research results, and that have to be in some way addresses to the end user, what the end user want in order to create some priority. But an important element of this big puzzle is the education. So to provide the workforce skilled and also on the right moment for that particular area was so important. So this afternoon we start with this panel, the space continue to inspire the next generation, planting the seed of a future career in STEM, and how we can enhance this trend among our community. The facilitator is our friend Anthony Murfett, is the Deputy Head of Australian Space Agency. Please, Anthony, come on board. And then the panelist is Dr. Lisa Harvey-Smith, Australian first woman in the STEM ambassador. Mr. Michael Pakakis, Director of Victorian Space Science Education Center. Peta Kourbelis is Principal, Hamilton Secondary College. Dr. Durant, Director of Questacon. And Vienna Tran, South Hemisphere Space Study Program. Anthony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicola. So it's great to be here today. I think if we reflect on the day, actually if I reflect on the last 24 hours, it has been monumental what we've seen here in South Australia, and this has been replicated across the nation. And for us to continue this momentum, so we've heard from the Prime Minister this morning, we've heard from Megan, and you saw the slide that said we have a sector of 3.9 billion and we've got around 10,000 people employed. In 10 years' time, we're going to have it at 12 billion and we're going to create another 20,000 jobs. The only way that we can do that is by inspiring the generation. How do we use space and how do we engage with STEM? And importantly, how do we support diversity and inclusion? Because that is the only way we're going to be able to achieve those goals and what Australia can do. And if you look at our values as the agency, we talk about responsible, but we also talk about being inclusive. And I think if we're looking forward to the future generation, the thing we need to do as a society is to really embrace that. And so on that note, we look at the assembled panel that we have here. We've got Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, Australia's first Women in STEM ambassador, and importantly, a member of our advisory group. We have Michael from VSEC, we have Peta from the Hamilton Secondary College, we have Professor Durant from Questacon, and we have Vienna Tran, who are saying, how am I going to introduce these people and how would you like to be introduced? So this is our aspiring space medicine doctor, and that's close to my heart as well, and also alumnus of the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program. And these are the people that we need to inspire here in Australia for us to have a future. Now for this session, what we're going to do, I'm going to flip it around a little bit, and it's not because I haven't prepared and I don't know what questions to ask, but when we're talking with the panel, what we want to do is make it interactive, because sometimes the best way to explore this topic is actually to open it up. And just before looking at me on the screen there, remember we've got Slido, so please log into Slido, and if there are questions, if you can start putting those in, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to get each of the panel members to briefly introduce themselves and then just give a little bit of a snapshot of their role, how it applies to space education, and what is the opportunity in front of us. And then from there, hopefully the Slido questions start coming in and we'll start exploring those issues, but if not, it's okay. I do have some questions that we can ask. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Lisa, and just to give a bit of an introduction about your background and what do we see in front of us.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Lisa Harvey-Smith, I'm the Australian Government's Women in STEM Ambassador, which means I work across all sectors, across industry, education, and with governments right across the country. to try and increase the participation of women and girls in STEM, and also interested in increasing the participation overall in STEM and the level of education and the commitment to that education as we move forward into this new age where we have a space agency driving space industry. So the interesting parts of that, I guess I'll go to my background first. I'm an astrophysicist by trade. Someone's got to be. And what astrophysics meant to me throughout my career really was always looking back to my first experiences as a young kid. And, you know, those were things like looking up into the night sky in my back garden when I was 12 years old and looking at the planet Mars, or, you know, staring up at the beauty of the night sky from a truly dark place and just beholding that unique beauty and the majesty of all of that. So that the inspiration in space and in astronomy in particular is not hard to capture for a young person. It's just incredible when you go out the city and you look at the stars. So astronomy is often called the gateway drug. It's a STEM discipline, a science that gets kids so excited and interesting and engaged, and not just kids but adults too. So it's never hard to use STEM, to use astronomy as a hook into STEM. But the question in my role as the Women in STEM ambassador is, how do we use that hook that interests pretty much kids from all backgrounds, all genders, into translating that into an education that engages and teaches the relevant skills to build industry-ready people who can build the Australian Space Agency, who can build the Australian space industry, who can start companies and businesses and grow those and collaborate internationally and play on the world stage. So it's really interesting to me how we can help develop these things. I've been working with a group of deans from universities, deans of engineering, and tackling this problem. How do we get young people ready for industry, and how do universities and other institutes of learning get kids ready? Because in schools, engineering isn't talked about too much. Engineering is something maybe that you do in school, but it's not talked about by name, so it doesn't really have that identity. So these are the sorts of issues I'm trying to address. These are the sort of questions that I'm trying to talk with the community about. The other issue is, you know, why a lot of women or young girls are not going into degrees like engineering. Fewer than about 10%, just over 10% of engineering vet students are female. That's a tiny, tiny number, and why is that? Some universities have tried renaming their courses. They've renamed an identical engineering course with a new name, and the female participation rate has shot up. So it's a branding problem, it's an identification problem. It's the fact that engineering doesn't have this sort of identity. The other issue is being played out right now in New South Wales. A colleague of mine noticed that in the New South Wales school science curriculum, years 11 and 12 for HSC, there are 82 scientists mentioned, and 2 of them are women, and the other 80 are men. 80. So what we're teaching young people is that women do not contribute to science, and they have not historically, which could not be further from the truth. So what we need to present in schools, in our curricula, in the education system as a whole, is the truth about science, the truth about STEM, which is it's exciting, it's engaging, it's diverse, and you need a broad diversity of people working in this field to make this new industry a great success.
Thank you, Lisa. And that touches on some really important themes coming back to diversity, inclusion, engagement, and how do we lift our diversity, because that, as I said earlier, is the only way we're going to be able to achieve, not just in space, this is across the whole economy. And I think one of the things the agencies will always advocate is how we as an agency can champion that effect. And we do appreciate that Lisa is on our advisory group to guide us on how we can provide that intersection with her broader agenda. So next, I will do an introduction with Michael. So Michael has many years looking after the Victorian Space Science Education Centre. The agency's been up and running for 18 months. The VSEC has been in place for many years, and when we first went overseas to the International Astronautical Congress, one of the institutions that were there was VSEC, and Michael has been instrumental in bringing students and introducing them into the international community. So I've probably taken a little bit of the stuff that he's done, but I'm going to get Michael to give a bit of an overview of what his background, and we can start exploring some questions. So Michael.
Thank you, Anthony. Good afternoon, everyone. Just on the funny side, Anthony, at one stage they thought I was the agency and VSEC was the agency, so it was a very interesting situation. Like Lisa, I'm so proud and so happy that we do have an agency now. I've been an educator for 35 years now. About 20 years ago, I came up with this idea of putting together a centre of excellence in STEM, which we now call the Victorian Space Science Education Centre. We wanted to introduce to the teachers in our state and also to the students in our state how exciting and how engaging space was. We adapted we tried to adapt all of the curriculum that the Victoria teaches in terms of its STEM areas and put that space spin to it. And again, why did we do this? Well, because of all of the years that I've spent in the classroom, whenever I actually did that, the engagement factor increased by 200% in the classroom, and there wasn't one child that wasn't interested in actually participating in the activities and listening to what I had to say. So very, very powerful tool in terms of teaching. We were the first probably educational institution to introduce what's referred to as scenario-based learning. So we've developed a number of programs which immerse students in role play. For example, our Mars program, students will come in, they will be astronauts on a Martian surface, simulated Martian surface. They will become engineers in a mission control, and they do then become research scientists in the afternoon, analysing all of the data they've collected in mission control and also all of the data they collected on the surface of Mars. So it's quite a immersive, as I said, experience and very effective experience. But in order to sell this experience and not be, laughed at in terms of how can you come for one day and have all this fun and is this an educational experience? What we did was we developed curriculum to support not only the programs that we developed at the centre, but also the teaching in the classrooms. So the Mars program is really concentrating on all of the earth science, for example, that is being taught at Year 8 and Year 9 in Victoria. So we've packaged a teaching program. We haven't forced anyone to come and do the program after they use our material. It's an option. But we're trying to show teachers a different way, a more effective way, using research and evidence-based teaching and methods in the classroom, and try to actually show them that there is a much better way and an easier way for them to teach more effective science, technology, engineering, mathematics in their classrooms. The centre has evolved over the last 20 years, and it's been 20 years since I've been involved now, to an internationally recognised educational institution. And we're very, very proud of that. We've done that because, again, we've tried to bring as many people on board as possible, including our teachers in our classrooms, industry, all the university partners, and all of our international partners. We are a member of the International Space Education Board, which allows us to sit on a table with all the heads of education of all the agencies in the world, and we bring a lot of that back to our programs, a lot of that back to our curriculum that we develop. Recently we've developed a teaching program for quantum computing that was working directly with the lead scientist office at NASA Ames. So those partnerships and those collaborations can only occur being part of that group. We run, as part of the ICEP, we run the International teachers, outreach program, and also a teacher professional development program in every country that IAC is held. And that's another area, and this is why I brought it up, that's another area that we're very, very serious about, is increasing our capacity, our teacher capacity in teaching of science and mathematics, which I think is probably, and there was one of the questions that's sent by Anthony about what actually makes a difference, and I think that's, and I'm sure Peta will back me up on this when she starts talking, we have to increase the capacity, we have to increase the ability of our teachers to be more confident with the emerging sciences and also bring that into the classroom and use that in order to inspire our students to go into areas like space science. We also have to look at curriculum, like Lisa has mentioned. Those type of things that need constantly need to be reviewed. Anyway, I better stop because I can talk forever.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael. And I like what does make a difference, and it's engaging with kids, inspiring them, giving them tools that get them into science. One of the other things I hope we do explore today, and as we go around talking to people, not only do we need to think about inspiring children, providing the tools for teachers, but how do we give confidence to parents that space is a future for Australia? Because at home, kids are with their parents and they're having the conversation about what the future looks like. What we have to do collectively as a sector is to give that confidence that Australia is going to be in space, and there are many jobs that we can do, and we need to invest and support that now. So that's a broader part I hope we get to explore today. But beyond that, I wanted to introduce Peta Kourbelis, who's the principal of the Hamilton Secondary College, and I was quite taken aback. One, they have a fabulous Mars facility, but also they've recently completed a STEM education centre, and some of the themes, again, are very close about how do we engage with our children. So with that brief introduction, we'll hand over to Peta to say a couple of words.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I've been in education like Michael for a very long time, more years than I'd like to actually publicly admit. And I've had a passion for STEM for a really long time. And in my previous school, I'd spent some time nationally, and I'd gone overseas to see what other schools overseas, what do they do with STEM. And whilst I saw a lot of good practice, there wasn't quite a definitive notion of what is exactly STEM. When I came to Hamilton, I guess I was blessed that I came into a team of people, teachers who had been working in the space arena for quite a long time and were experts within this. And so we started to build on their strengths. We had, I found a lot of association with VSEC, and we created our space school in late 2017, and our model was actually built on and inspired by the work of VSEC. So we have started to have an outreach program, very much like, and I won't keep repeating it, but as VSEC have, and using our own experts within our own school. Within about a year, we've had just over 2,000 students come through the outreach program, which talks about space and allowing students to be able to feel and touch what would it look like if they had a mission to Mars, if they went to Mars, what do they need to do, and how to prepare and to immerse themselves, sort of that hands-on program. We believe, like, as Michael said, that the essence of engaging students in STEM is around a robust curriculum. And so, in addition to the Mission to Mars program, we've developed, units of work across the curriculum that every learning area within the school touches on an area of space. How would a space curriculum look like in PE? What would it look like in English and so forth, so that we can have the whole school approach to this really important topic. And the third area that we have established, which Anthony talked about, was a subject that we actually call STEM, and that's run through a new facility that we have, and it's about encouraging and introducing students to the real concept of what we believe STEM could look like. And it's not STEM through a particular subject, but actually merging the four disciplines and seeing how the four disciplines actually work together. And I was interested, Lisa, in your comment about engineering, because that's come up so many times. What is engineering? How does that look like? And particularly not only for secondary students, but also for primary students. How do they engage with that? Opportunities that our school has taken up and is taking up is actually embedding and supporting and encouraging students from primary schools through our outreach program to be inspired by the work in STEM, by the sciences, by the maths, understanding and engaging with engineering, right up to engaging with universities and having our students work with university students and their departments as a sort of a way and an encouragement sort of to the pipeline, to the workforce within the space industry and STEM.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And so we're going to introduce Professor Durant next, and with the topic close to our heart, so we're partnering with Questacon to deliver the Australian Space Discovery Centre, which will, here in Adelaide, be a centrepiece to inspire the generation. So, and if you haven't met Graham, very passionate around STEM, leads Questacon both in Canberra and their national outreach around Aspiring Australia. So, Graham, it'd be good to get your thoughts, a little bit of an introduction, and what's the opportunity in front of us.
Okay, thank you, Anthony, and good afternoon, you all. So I'm Space Generation 1.0. So I was 5 years old when Sputnik was launched. I was leaving school around the time that Armstrong and Aldrin stepped onto the moon. I'd finished my PhD and was starting work in a university in Scotland at the time Voyager was launched, and here I am a bit later on. Space Generation 2.0 is the Earth observation generation and the Mars generation. And I think it's really important that we recognize that there are these many opportunities to engage with space and that we have to take advantage of them as they come up. As director of Questacon, I've learnt a number of things. I've learnt that people are different, that everyone brings different things to them into a learning environment. They learn in different ways. They have different levels of skill, of knowledge, of attitudes and beliefs. So that you've got to create products that can be inclusive to many different types. I think I'm here probably as a champion for out-of-school learning. So we've heard some brilliant examples of what happens in school. I think we have to recognize that most people spend most of their lives outside school, and learning for life is actually the reality of Generation 2.0 and others. We have to create opportunities to enrich what happens in school. So what I've learned through the work at Questacon is that when informal out-of-school learning sits alongside school learning, it's a really rich opportunity for experiences and starting to develop the mastery that is needed. If you think about, in this Olympic year, how an athlete gets from being a small child to world class, it's a long journey. It requires a lot of effort. And the same is true for the people who want to develop to be the world leaders in space science, technology, law, medicine, accounting, investment banking, etc. All of the careers that are in the space industry. So we've got to recognize the talent early. We've got to nurture it both in schools and in the communities. And that's going to require us finding opportunities for young people, for older people, to get involved directly in the work of the space agencies. And what I mean by that is, you know, we're bombarded daily by a massive amount of data. And we have a lot of people, we have a cognitive surplus around Australia, people who've got a lot of brain power with a bit of time on their hands, who would love to get involved in image analysis or some aspects of Earth observation that matter very much to them in their own local context. So whether it's monitoring the biodiversity or the bushfire recovery. So I think there are opportunities to develop projects that can engage citizen science. There are projects that we need to develop to help secondary school students not only learn within classroom, but get deeply engaged with industry, with academia, with the research agencies, doing real science, authentic science, meaningful science. And you know, our youngsters are capable of much more than we probably allow them to do, and we need to let them free and actually get involved. And that's the way I think you develop that deep mastery. So in Questacon, we get about 500,000 visitors a year. We get about 140,000 school students, about 13,500 teachers come through the centre. And that allows them to have perhaps an introductory level engagement with science and technology. In order to get the deep, prolonged exposure to learning opportunities, we have to then create other programs. We also have to work on geographic and social isolation and create opportunities across Australia and regional remote. So we reach out across Australia and indeed internationally with our work. We're really excited that we are working here with the Space Agency in Adelaide on the Australian Space Discovery Centre. And one of the strong foci places in that will be a careers hub. We've got to identify those jobs. We've got to then identify pathways so that people can see themselves and start out, on a launch pad onto a career that'll take them, years to gain the expertise, the knowledge, the skills, the confidence, and all the attributes you need to get to the top in these fields. So we're looking forward to that. We're looking forward to having our exhibition, which will engage the public. But importantly, we're looking forward to connecting many of the existing initiatives across Australia. VSEC, Hamilton are just two excellent examples, and there are others. So if we want to succeed nationally, we have to find a way of connecting all of that activity, identifying the gaps. Where are the places where people do not have those opportunities? Finding ways to fill those gaps so that we can make what happens here in Adelaide work for us nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. And then we're going to turn to our last speaker, so our aspiring space doctor, Vienna, who I'll call the Artemis generation. So when we were meeting with the administrator of NASA, we've got the Artemis projects that's going along. So whether it's 2.0, I'm going to move on. I think we're going to go with the Artemis generation. I like the Mars generation. I think that's a good one because that's where our inspiration is. But Vienna, it's really great to have you here because it's one, space medicine's close to my heart, but it is one of those opportunities that Australia can play. Australia is world-renowned for its capacity for medical devices, creating new medical solutions, and as space becomes more accessible, we're looking to put humans back into space. We need to make sure they come back safely, and there is a big role for space medicine, and I think it's quite strategic for Vienna to be thinking down that path. So Vienna, as we look to the future, you've been engaged in an impressive career and education to date. What are the opportunities and what's inspired you to be on the journey that you are on?
Great question. Thank you so much, Anthony, for having me on the panel. I want to introduce myself first with a story. When I was 5, my father took me to the Heights Observatory to look at the moon, and I think that's the spark that inspired me to pursue something in space, whatever that was. And over the years, I watched too many documentaries by Brian Cox and Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and went to too many talks by astronauts, including our own Andy Thomas. You can have never have too many talks. And I said, in year 10, I want to be an astronomer. I want to be an astrophysicist. And there were some adults in my life, including my well-meaning parents, who said, well, how are you going to bring home the bacon? Are you going to get a job? And that's when I thought, I am a victim and also a conqueror of this system. I'm a victim because I took the test to get into medicine, accidentally got in, and here I am 5 years later. But I'm a conqueror of the system because I have now forged my own destiny and my own path towards this nebulous and niche field of space medicine. So it's a very exciting journey, and I really don't know what's ahead of me. Along the way, though, in year 5, I met Dr. Gordon Cable, who is now one of my mentors and is going to be my supervisor for my honours project this year, which is in collaboration with DLR in Germany. So this year I did the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program, which is a collaboration between the International Space University and UniSA right here in Adelaide. And I was very, very lucky to be one of 5 full scholarship winners to this program, which was awarded by the Australian government, South Australian government, and SASIC together. And it was an incredible live-in 5-week experience where we were able to learn all different aspects of the space industry. So I was sort of stepping out of my space medicine silo and learning more about space engineering, sciences, law, policy and economics, and all these things. And now I feel like I actually understand some of the things at this forum, which is really nice. I'm really grateful for the people who helped me get there. One of the principles of the International Space University Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program is that it's intercultural, international, and interdisciplinary. I was able to meet so many people, most of them from other countries and other non-English speaking backgrounds. And here's where I think Australia can do well. We are already such a diverse, multicultural country. And we have the potential to collaborate not only with each other, but also other countries, other space agencies, organizations, individuals. Space is for everyone, no matter where you come from. And SHSSP has taught me that we can work together. It unites us, no matter our creed. So I suppose I'd like to quote something that you may have heard of. It's that it takes a village to raise a young person. So I want to spend a minute just thanking a few people in my life. Firstly, Dr. Andy Thomas, thank you. You're so encouraging and you have so much faith in me, and you remember me every time I come up and talk to you. Dr. Cable, thank you for being my space medicine inspiration. Michael Davis and Nicola, thank you for having me come and talk here and believing in me. Everyone on the panel has had some sort of influence in where I am today. So Lisa Harvey-Smith, Woman in Space, amazing. I was at Hamilton's Secondary College in 2012 as part of SA Space School, and that was run by Olivia, Tony, and Mike. That was in year 10, and it's a big part of why I'm here today. In year 11, I went to VSEC. It's a great centre, I highly recommend it. And this year, I'm going to be collaborating a bit with Questacon in developing their Space Discovery Centre in the life sciences field. So you can see that I'm not speaking in isolation here. I'm here because of how we work together, and I think Australia does that so well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vienna. Lovely. And I think if we've got people of the calibre of Vienna looking at Australia's future in space, I think we're on a good trajectory. So I pick up on something else Vienna said, and talking around it takes a village for us to all grow. And over the next 47 minutes and 17 seconds, we will now explore that as a community here. And I do have a great array of questions. So the first one I want to pick up on, and this talks something that Peta talked about, was how you've integrated space as an inspirational element into many of your subjects. So the question that was posed is that science and medicine can inspire and motivate kids. How can we use space in schools and as part of the curriculum to get people, more people into STEM?
I guess I'll talk from a personal kind of view from what we do. If I can start off, I talked a little bit before about the Space Centre that we have. The Space Centre is purpose-built to encourage and inspire students to do STEM subjects. So if very briefly, it's about 5 learning spaces. There's not, in each of the learning spaces is specifically for a particular purpose. There are no desks and, you know, that traditional classroom look, but there's an area where students can work together to come up with ideas. There's another learning area for designing and using technology around that, another learning area about using the latest equipment and technology to build, and then another area for testing. And so we use that space around real life, I guess, projects. So one of the things that we do, for instance, in one of our curriculum areas is around rocketry. So students meet up at the centre and they have the opportunity to collaborate, and that's one of the most engaging things in the way that we bring students together. They want to collaborate, they want to actually sort of talk with their peers about what their ideas are and so forth. Being able to work together and being able to design or to be able to come up with various designs engages them and inspires them to be able to think a little bit more critically about what their project is about and where it's heading. The testing, being able to test their product and to see that if it doesn't work well, and to be able to then use that not as a failure but to how to critically analyse what went wrong and to be able to come back and sort of to test it out, that kind of brings them again together. And in that way we kind of inspire them and pull them together to be able to engage in that sort of STEM area. What the, I guess, part of the program is, as I think I said earlier, it's not about doing STEM through a particular project, but it's, a particular subject, but it's about pulling the 4 disciplines together so that students understand how they all hang together. And there's a lot of aha moments around that, and that's a really engaging way that we bring it about.
All right, thank you, Peter. And then I might just turn to Lisa quickly, just as a follow-up, because Lisa works across many disciplines, and we targeted a little bit on can we use space to get people into STEM. But as you've moved and looked across the nation, what are some of the ways that we can work with the curriculum to lift participation in STEM, and is space part of that story?
Yeah, I think space is clearly an inspiration in a general sense. We see that in the media, in the popular media. People are wandering around wearing NASA T-shirts. We've got to change that. We've got to see kids in Australia wanting an Australian Space Agency T-shirt, which you can buy at Questacon, by the way. And all this merch, kids should be wandering around in this stuff because they should be proud of what this country's doing, building this capability, and want to be part of it. But the most common thing young people ask me is, how did you get to where you are now? How did you get involved in space stuff? In my case, astronomy. In some people, they might want to build satellites, or they might want to be involved in space medicine or the development of other technologies. So we've really got to do that storytelling piece to young people, and I think that we've got to do that through schools, but also through the way we talk in the media about science and tell those stories of how discoveries are made and how collaborations and slow, painful progress, quite often involving hundreds, if not thousands of people, lead to great things. The amount of people who were involved in the Apollo missions, the amount of people it takes just to launch a satellite, even though that's a very routine thing nowadays. You can look at it in the sense of agriculture. How many people, when you eat a carrot, how many people have been involved in all the processes giving you that carrot? So I think we've lost touch a little bit with the realities of life and how hard things are. Often there is sort of a glorious sheen put on things like spaceflight, in particular human spaceflight. It's reduced to a photograph of Buzz Aldrin, or it's reduced to a movie for 2 hours showing a mission or a part of a mission. But it's actually nice to watch a show like Hidden Figures, the movie showing some of the people in the background that haven't had that exposure and the jobs that they did and the contributions that they made in the background towards these great feats. So I think with the education piece, we all have a responsibility, including within schools, to tell those stories of how discoveries are made. It's not a eureka moment. It's a very much a process. And teaching in that way is really going to help us to understand the pathways that young people can then see themselves going on to industry. And just another very brief point on that. I think that a really powerful tool for people here in Adelaide, in the education system here, would be to connect with local industries and people in this region. And wherever you're from in Australia, that applies too. So, if you're working in this region, in a school, connect to the local jobs and the local industries that people could possibly go to after they leave school, and highlight the different educational paths that might lead them there. And I think that will give young people a real sense of mapping out their potential future journeys.
No, thank you, Lisa. And I'm going to pick up on the industry angle because there's several questions that have come in around if we're going to build a future workforce, how do we engage with industry? One of the questions says the industry tours go really well, which you get the inspirational element, the kids get to touch and feel what space could be, but it sometimes becomes a bit of a challenge to do the industry engagement. So we're keen to explore with a couple of panel members, what are either some of the good models that you've seen that encourage industry to engage with students, or what are some of the things we can do to increase the adoption to get that industry angle and show how beautiful space can be?
Okay, perhaps I'll first go at that one. So industry has a critical role and a critical need. So the critical role is they have to have careers. There has to be career pull that encourages people into the workforce. The opportunities that they have are to create, through internships, through meaningful projects, opportunities for deeper engagement of young people, so that they can, really start to understand what it is like to work, what it is like to work in industry. And I think there are areas there that they can play a role. Building a bigger base for a STEM pipeline, of course, is important, but there are a lot of youngsters who are already interested in space. And I think what we have to do is maintain that interest, develop that interest. And that's going to require programs and projects from late primary right through, to completing tertiary education. So there are some very real opportunities and responsibilities and challenges and roles that industry could play, not just to fund things, but to engage people in a meaningful way to create those opportunities so they can learn what it is like to work in a particular industry.
All right, thank you, Graham. Lisa?
Yeah, there's a few great examples. A couple I'd highlight briefly are the STEM industry school partnerships in New South Wales. These have come out of the Hunter Valley region, and they're very, very successful, now being run throughout New South Wales. That's a great program because it really drives very meaningful local industry partnerships, which was kind of what I was getting at before, so that young people in schools have a sense of the jobs that they might do, and potentially staying in their own communities or staying in the region where they live, and see those pathways and you know, get the encouragement and the experience of actually visiting sites, you know, work sites, that seems to be very successful. The other one is the core learning model, which is not to do with space, but it's to do with geology and mining and resources, and it's run in Western Australia by Susie Urbaniak, and she won the Prime Minister's Prize for science teaching a couple of years ago. And it's really wonderful because, again, it takes young people out of the schools, often in cities, and it takes them to mining regions. So they prepare, they learn their geology, they learn about resources and the industry, and then they actually go out in the field, go to mines, and they go out and prospect for minerals in situ. So it's really wonderful to get that hands-on experience mixed with the essential background in the science and the theory that you need to have.
All right, no, thank you for those examples, Lisa. Now, there's a question that is at the top of the list here, and it's about ATARs. So I might probably turn to Vienna first. And so the question is, in a world where ATAR is king, how do we encourage students to engage in topics such as science and mathematics so that we can continue to build that STEM pipeline?
Great question. ATAR is not king, as many people may disagree with me, but the ATAR to get into a certain course isn't all that astronomical. How do we encourage people to stay in maths and science? That's the problem. There's something called the leaky pipeline. Now, Graham, you mentioned a pipeline of STEM where students are being encouraged to go down this pipeline to pursue a career at the end. And the leaky pipeline is what happens when you put holes in that pipe. It's when students start to have other priorities, where they start to get disinterested, or they think maths is not cool, or you know, they think it's too hard, or something like that. We need to fix those holes in the leaky pipeline to be able to fast track those students to get into STEM sort of careers. It's a culture, I think, to get the best ATAR, but I think we need to encourage students to prioritise other parts of school, like getting into workshops and programs and space schools, and visiting places that they'll actually remember for the rest of their life. Some people have probably forgotten their ATAR in this room, but you may not have forgotten the experiences that you've had while you've been at school, the workshops, the people that you've met, the talks that you've been to. It's those out-of-school experiences and those extracurricular experiences that really speak to students and say, well, this is what's happening in the real world outside of the classroom. There's a lot of didactic learning that happens in the classroom, and students will associate that with obligation and something that might scare them. And we need to create a culture that says space and STEM is not scary. It is our future.
Thank you, Fiona. Peter, did you want to just talk about, or even Michael, because I think as part of the question is how do we get people into science and mathematics, but how do we break the perception that those subjects are hard and they can be inspirational and they can be fun?
I guess I think people have touched on some of the areas already, but I think part of it is that it's not a short-term proposition that somehow, because we are talking about space, all of a sudden students are going to go into those areas. It's a long-term proposition of actually starting from our early years and engaging students in what I guess I would call real-world projects and programs, getting them to understand what the science is about, that it isn't scary, as Vienna is saying, and what's the purpose of it. If I can say, for instance, in our Mission to Mars program, where there's a lot of scope with geology. A few years ago, if we said to students, we want, there's a whole unit of work that we'd like you to do around rocks and analysing rocks, they wouldn't engage. Once we got them in to do the mission to Mars, where there was a purpose of why they were actually looking for those samples, then analysing them and having a whole context around them, then all of a sudden it became cool to look at these rocks. So it's getting the purpose. I think we're on some timeline of, we've got the space agency in Adelaide. We can see that there is a real purpose. All of a sudden there is an interest because students can see a purpose. Our job really is about making it concrete in schools and purposeful in schools, and making it in a way that maths and science are not isolated. We teach them in an isolated way, but we need other programs to pull it all together to make it look, a project, because we work in sort of projects in the real world. We don't just sort of do maths in the real world, but it's a long-term process.
And Michael, it'd be great to draw on your experience, and noting that you've also sat on the international committee about that, and I'm sure they've explored some of these issues. So it'd be great to hear from you.
It's not that difficult, actually. We just have to make those subjects more related to the real world. And I think every time we do that in the classroom, it works. We also have to tell students that, mathematics is hard, and mathematics takes a lot of work, but those mathematicians you see over there, they just didn't get born mathematicians. They worked hard. They worked very hard to get to where they are. And I think that's an important thing, because I think a lot of students don't think that way. And I have to dare say a lot of teachers, when they go in the classroom, don't think that way. They go in there with a preconception that they have half the class are maths students and half aren't. So that's another story. But I think it's that simple.
Graham.
Yeah, the discussion's reminding me of an anecdote I heard a while back from JPL, and they have within their engineers some who are more useful than others, and they tried to understand what it was that made one particular group of engineers more useful to them as problem solvers and great thinkers. And they found out that the discriminator between those who great academic ability and those who had great practical ability and problem solving ability was whether there was a shed in their lives early on. And the importance of that is, if you've got a shed, if you're tinkering, making stuff, taking things apart, you're learning those tactile, practical skills alongside your academic skills. And it's that hands and brain working together that created this generation of problem solvers. Now, of course, I worry, because as everyone's going to live in the city, they're not having the shared culture. So we're not having those opportunities to make things, which is why schools, I think, are great developing maker spaces where people can get those practical skills. So I think there's a bit more to it than just what happens in school and the curriculum. I think you've got to develop your skill sets alongside your academic qualifications.
And thanks, Graham. I might just build on that a little bit, and it is actually turning a little bit to the role of the community. So what Questacon does really well, not only do you have the National I was going to say Space Centre, but that's us. The National Science and Technology Centre. You've got a great truck that drives around the nation to engage children in all the regions, but also you engage with the communities. And as we've heard, some themes across some of the answers is we do need to inspire communities. So what have been some of the things that you've seen that worked really well to showcase what the future looks like from a STEM perspective through the lens of Questacon?
Our current exhibition explores the interface between robots and humans. So there's a very practical example, and those of you who've got the opportunity to come to Canberra, be very welcome, and we'll do a special deal if you show your pass, and we'll even give you a deal on the Space Agency T-shirts as well.
Did you hear that? Space Agency T-shirts. So there's a couple of times.
So buy early, buy often, and you can go on to our online shop and get them.
Might get in trouble for advertising there.
There are plenty of ways you can engage with complex science. You know, exhibitions are one media. There are other media of people talking, of social media, video clips, of websites, of talks. I mean, for example, we have Badri Yunus, who's the Deputy Administrator of NASA, is speaking at Questacon on Tuesday, and he will be able to, share his perspective. So bringing experts in to share those knowledge. So there's no one model. And what works in Canberra is different from when you get out on the road, because as you go further away into remote communities, their opportunities are less. So one of the things I've been thinking about is how can we get Indigenous Australians interested in careers in space? And I know with the logo and there's movement in that area, but at a practical level, how do you actually do it? How do you get the teachers, the youngsters to recognise the opportunity, and how do you then nurture them through the secondary years, encourage them to take on advanced study and get the experience? And if you're up in Maningrida, okay, with a bit of luck you might have a launch facility and there'll be opportunities there, but in other parts of Australia there aren't those opportunities. So I think there's some big challenges and big opportunities, and they're the sort of things that keep directors awake at night. How can we do more? How can we do it better? How can we allow the people who are isolated to be part of this movement?
And that's a really good point, Graham, because we heard from Michael saying you've got to, it's not just a subject, let's put a mission behind it, let's make it tangible. But when we turn to our rural and regional areas, what tools do we have, and how do we engage those communities so we can inspire the nation? Because we are a big continent. There is many regional and rural communities, and really what we have here with space is to engage. So it'd be great to hear from Lisa.
And that's where I think Earth observation plays a really important role, because every one of those communities, there are applications of satellite technology that are relevant directly to that community.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Lisa?
Yeah, just on that point, going back to something I said earlier, again, you go back to the local relevance of a subject. So education has to be tailored, for the local context. When I was working at the CSIRO, and I know they still run this program, to do with the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope in Western Australia. They have a program where they go to the local schools in those very remote regions of the Midwest of WA, and offer partnerships so that kids in schools can see the telescope that's being built on their country, that they can use telescopes themselves. They can visit the site and do work experience as well. So those very local projects are very, very effective. But you have to then link that to the educational pathways that people can go on. So linking that to the local educational complex in the nearby town, so that people can see a path themselves. So I think that can be very effective too.
Thank you, Lisa. And Michael?
I was just simply going to add governments. That's where governments come in. And I know with us, for example, the funding model that our centre runs on is really targeting that rural population, and also that low socioeconomic demographic. And that's played a huge role in getting quite a number of students from those areas into the centre. Also giving us enough funding to develop platforms where we can, rather than they come to the centre, we take the centre to them, and that could be an electronic sort of platform or an outreach program and so on. So I think the governments and the education departments around the country, I think that's where they they do their best work.
And Vienna?
Just really quickly, I think it's wonderful that we've got these programs to help children learn about what's out there. And my addition to that is you can learn all the facts and figures that you want, but children who come as part of a school program will kind of always associate it with school. And for me, it's been the out-of-school evening public events that I've been to that have stayed the best in my memory. So it's things like astronauts coming to talk to the public for free. That's accessible. That's what accessible is. And as part of Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program, Amanda Johnson worked really hard to get Paolo Nespoli in for a few days. He's an Italian astronaut, and he gave a public talk that some of us may have gone to. It's things like that where you see sold out auditoriums, kids asking questions. That's, I think, what stays in their memory, because it's stories and it's people that will inspire the next generation more than any other classroom will.
No, thank you. So the next topic we've been thinking about in the agency is the broad breadth of skills that will be available in the space sector. We'll have astrophysicists, we'll have engineers. I was on the radio this morning explaining we're going to have space lawyers. So businesses are now looking at business models, so that means there's lawyers, so that's another opportunity. There's communicators. We have to communicate what we're doing, and Lisa's really outlined the importance of explaining why we're investing, why we're doing space. But it means there's also other careers that are available. There's technicians, and there are a range of other skills that can be translated, because what we're seeing with space, with the massive transformation that is underway, it means that it's more accessible because there are many other skills. And I use sometimes the example of there are engineers or there are mechanics that are building engines that are with sprockets and with silicon seals. Because space is more accessible, because we're building these things, they're the type of skills that can be used in space, because it is an area that is really transforming. So in light of that, part of the STEM discussion and using space as an inspirational element, there's an assumption that it is university is the next step. But I want to pose to the panel, are there other solutions to our education system? Is university the only path, or is there a role for TAFEs, micro-credentialing, to ensure that students, there are a multitude of skills that we have, the workforce that we need to support the vast array of jobs that will be here, a reminder that I've got to create 20,000 jobs by 2030. So to the panel.
Can I go first?
Yeah, Michael.
I've read in the past where certain industries were not happy with the skills graduates were graduating with, and they've basically have announced that they were actually going to go and then choose those students before they get to university or before they get to a TAFE and train them. And I think that's an excellent model. Now, if that tertiary sector is not listening to industry, and I really got to be on the side of industry a lot, because I think their influence on, educational curriculum reform, they should be at the forefront to that. They should be influencing. They should be more into the education departments, the governments, whoever they are, that are sitting down designing future curriculums. I think industry has to play an enormous part in that. And I think that model and that announcement, I think, may have woken some tertiary institutions up. But if it hasn't, I think that is an excellent model, because that guarantees a direct pathway into that industry for that student, and it also trains that student to work successfully in that industry.
Thanks, Vienna?
So you can probably see, on the list of names that all of us, we've got the word STEM here, and it's spelled S-T-E-M. It's actually spelled wrong. It's S-T-E-A-M-M. The A is for arts, and the M is for medicine. Now, medicine I've talked about already, but what about the arts? What about communicating space as an art to the general public? That's one of the real reasons that space inspires us so much. It's economics and jobs and education, yes, but what about what touches our hearts and our minds? It's music, it's dance, it's Paul Kerno talking at the Adelaide Planetarium about Aboriginal skies. It's Kerry Doherty talking about the history of space in Australia. It's Alice Gorman, the space archaeologist. These are all things that are part of space and all things that you don't really need a university degree for. So we need to break down that stereotype that space is for university graduates. It's not.
Can I just add to what Vienna was saying is that we do assume that when we talk about STEM that it's going to be, straight to university, but I think with the new announcements, it is a sort of a wake up to even to our education system about the fact that students really need the appropriate skills, and some of those skills are actually going to come from the micro-credential courses or the tasters, and they start from as early as a year 10 courses. So it becomes really important that we start to talk to students about their capabilities and skills from year 8 onwards and build on those capabilities and using sort of the taster courses to introduce them to what TAFE can offer, because there's a lot of technical jobs that will then connect them. There's no, barriers that once they go to TAFE and they gain some skills in some technical areas that they cannot then go to university. I think that needs to sort of be put out there, that the two sectors kind of work together, but it's really the important part of it is about how students gain their skills and what's the best system to be able to support them in getting those skills.
Yeah, and those of us of Space Generation 1.0 remember apprenticeships, which were actually a really good way of introducing people to work and developing mastery. So the master-apprentice model is not dead. So identifying talent early, bringing it in-house and training it, and not outsourcing education, I think is something that has to be looked at.
No, thanks, great. And I'm going to change a little tact. So we've spoken a lot about education in schools and getting students into space careers. But as we look at growing the space economy here, we also know there is a great array of skills that reside outside of the sector that we need to, that we might provide an opportunity to spin in to the space sector. What are some of the ways that we can encourage those that might be in other fields that haven't thought about space and bring them in to think about space?
Well, in my experience, Ferraris, Lamborghinis and Porsches always work. So, good quality jobs that pay well are very attractive to people. Once the jobs are there, you'll get people coming from all sorts of places who want to work in the space industry. So I think that's something that you have to bear in mind. If there are particular shortages of skills, then you can have targeted programs and try and, if we were doing something this week, we'd be probably trying to see if we could transfer Holden workers into space industries. But there will be opportunities for specific programs if you need more people in a particular aspect of the space technologies. Then you can find those places. But you're competing against the defence industries and others who've got the same skills shortage. So it's an open market for jobs. You build a bigger pool, and if you have enough career pull, job pull, you won't have any problem recruiting. And of course, we've not even mentioned international dimension of bringing talent from overseas, and a lot of Australia is built on immigration and skilled migrant. So there are opportunities that perhaps we haven't spoken about yet today.
Yeah, thanks, great. And I think part of part of the opportunity, we think the earlier question around how do we support some of the trades, the apprenticeships, the non-university part into the sector. I think space has an opportunity to help part of that story, because one, you say space and people pay attention. I've got to mention space and dinosaurs. They're the two things that usually we have. We're talking about space today, but even if we look at the space industry and we can show the technical skills and the technicians and the cool work that they actually get to do. I've had a discussion around manufacturing, and manufacturing is sometimes hard from a perception thing, but when you talk about space manufacturing, which has these great technician skills, you don't actually need to go to university to do it. You can get some great technical skills. I think there's an opportunity to explore around showing what does the future of Australian jobs look like, and what does it look for multitudes of people, because there really is a great opportunity. Lisa.
Yeah, I think Adam Gilmore, he might be in the room. I think he's a great example of that. I know he's spoken before about going from the financial world to being a rocket master. So that's a good story. And building rockets and teaching himself engineering. So those stories are great. So it's not necessarily just people with technical skills or people who have gone through that traditional path where they knew what they wanted to do from the age of dot, and gone through that sort of straight line linear pathway, but people who say, hey, wait a minute, maybe I could use my skills, my experience in the business world to create a startup and grab people around me who have those technical skills and abilities. Because a lot of the Australian space industry is in the SME sphere. There's not necessarily going to be all made up of big international companies that just come here and sort of take over. It's going to be the startups, and we need that sort of cross-disciplinary work, and also people coming through the education system who don't just have either technical skills or the other types of skills. We don't silo STEM and send people away from those other experiences, but that people can get an education, whether that's through university or through vet, to actually have work experience and try things and have experience in the industry, and they haven't just sat in sandstone buildings for 3 years and scribbled down on a notebook. It's got to be practical and not theoretical, because the startup industries here are really driving this growth, I think.
Thank you. And I'm going to continue with a question to you, Lisa, because I want to come back to your role as Australia's first Women in STEM ambassador. And it'd be good if we get some thoughts from you on what do you believe will help attract more women into STEM, and is there a role for space to help you on that activity?
Yeah, I mean, I should put this in context. STEM's a big thing: science, technology, engineering, maths. There are more women graduating in science than men. So women are not underrepresented in science as a whole, but they are in physics and the physical sciences, mathematics, and in engineering are massively underrepresented. So it depends which disciplines you're talking about, because we tend to segregate girls and boys from a young age, tell them these are boys' things, these are girls' things, encourage certain activities, discourage others, and we go from there, so we diverge. It's sort of contextual. So girls are very interested and engaged in science. Engineering, as I've said before, that word, for some reason, evokes this image of a man in a hard hat and high-vis building a bridge or something like that, something mysterious, that doesn't seem welcoming to a lot of young women. And as I said earlier, just renaming engineering courses can actually transform the engagement. Another thing I wrote about in the conversation recently, it's just a simple thing you can do, but re-engineering the way that you present problems in educational settings. For example, if you do an activity in school and say, let's build a bridge, let's design and build a bridge, half the kids, it may not be on gender lines, it may just be, half the kids are going to be bored to death and going to say, why are we building a bridge? Who cares? I want to build a bridge. And half the kids might say, cool, I want to build a bridge. But if you say to young people, the rare mountain pygmy possum is endangered in Australia, and we live near a freeway, and they're all being run over by cars and lorries, and they're going to be extinct very soon. Do you want to help build a way for these, engineer and design a way for these possums to cross the freeway safely and not get squashed. And a lot more kids, I reckon you get 80-90% engagement, because you've provided, as was said earlier, that social, that environmental, that relevant, life-relevant context and that social context to the problem, and you've motivated the students to take part in the engineering challenge. So if we present things in textbooks as physics problems or as pendulums or their angles, who cares? Like, it's not relevant, it's not interesting. Rockets even, you know, they're not interesting to everyone. But if we present a range of different problems and try and engage children in that way, we're going to be a lot more successful. So it's just that creative thinking.
Thank you, Lisa. And we're coming close to the end of time for this session, not the end of time, literally.
Oh my God.
Sorry, there's so many space puns that I had to put one out there. So as we come to the end of the session, so this session's been, we've explored themes from how do we make science, engineering more engaging, it's giving it a social context, it's making it challenge-based rather than a pure topic. It's what are some of the ways that we engage with the rural and regional communities. So I think there's many things that we can have a think about as we go to afternoon tea. But one of the things I do want to now turn to each of the panel members, just as a closing statement, is what is one thing that you'd like to see that can support using space to inspire the next generation, even the current generation, so that we have the workforce we need in the future? Vienna.
Oh, I'm going to echo one of my favourite science people, and that's Jim Green, Chief Scientist of NASA. He actually visited the SHSSP for a few days to give us some lectures. And he has this concept called gravity assist. It's the name of his podcast, but it's a metaphor for what we're doing here. Gravity assist is when we have a satellite or a space probe, and it's going towards a massive body. And to make it accelerate, we use that massive body, like Jupiter or Venus, to make it swing around and change direction or velocity. And I'm going to use that word to connect what we like to talk about at the forum, space startups and the economy. We have a lot of gravity assists for space startups. We have incubators, we have accelerators, we have investors of all different types. Space startups are being very, very well supported here in Australia. Why not have a gravity assist for our future space generation? Why not have more VSECs, more Questacons, more space schools, more SHSSPs? I just want to see more of these opportunities for students to apply for and excel.
Graham.
Okay, yeah, well, how do you not agree with that? I think we've got a lot of great things happening in Australia, and we have to connect them together. So we've got to find a way of building a national community of space education and awareness, organisations and individuals, make it work, find the gaps, get it resourced, and as Vienna said, do more of it.
Thanks, Graham. So Peter, what's one thing you think we can use space for to inspire the generation ahead?
I think I can only add to what the other two speakers are saying, is that it's about making those connections. So how do we actually connect what we're doing in schools with either work or the real world to actually, I think that would be inspiring students, because it gives them a purpose of why they're actually learning it. We need to put a context around it.
That's a hard one, actually, picking one thing, because there's just so many things that, great things that are happening in our country. But I think very quickly, the one challenge I had in setting up the centre and putting together the programs was I couldn't refer to an Australian space program. I could refer to a European space program, an American space program, all these other things, and I just couldn't actually make a contextual connection with our country. And it was really hard to bring all of the stuff, even though there was a lot of stuff. In saying that, I think probably the most inspiring thing is people. The stories that you can tell students about people in the space industry in Australia and their achievements, and celebrating all of that, I think that's what inspires them. I mean, I know that's what inspired me when I was young. That's what inspired me to build this centre. And it was one person that actually inspired me. Actually, one person in the United States, and I could say one person in Australia. But yeah, I think people's stories. Yeah.
And Lisa?
Along those lines, we need a strong narrative. So as the Space Agency has been set up just over a year ago, is now the headquarters launched, and now we're developing this strong sort of moonshot narrative, Moon to Mars project. You know, we are supporting international partners, working with international partners to get people on the moon, to get people to Mars. That's a very, very strong story and a clear story. You know, how that's going to happen, all the details, that's to be worked out later. But it's the consultation with the public, it's the strong, clear narrative that's being developed, I think, that can lead us to, you know, a moonshot project. Having something that is distinctly Australian, that has a flag or a kangaroo on it, something, up on the International Space Station, a scientific mission or an observational mission, or some piece of equipment or an experiment that is going to be deployed to another world, another body in our solar system. And that is a wonderful story, you know, about which books will be written and documentaries made. And you've got to continue that clear, strong narrative, and that will inspire a nation.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'll start bringing this to a close. And that's such a beautiful way and an image. And one thing we spoke about, and we do speak about Moon to Mars, our 150 million investment. One is going to get Australian businesses into supply chains. We're going to show the world Australia's technology and knowledge and how it can support NASA to go forward to the moon and onto Mars. But you heard this morning there's a trailblazer element to that. And what we really want and what we will do is that we'll have the opportunity to see something in space with the Australian flag, because what we want to do is inspire the nation. And behind that, we'll also explain that every time someone does something, we're pretty sure that space touches that part of activity, and that's why we're investing in space. That's why we need to inspire our kids to get into space and understand STEM. It's why we need better inclusion. It's why we need to support diversity. And on that note, I want to bring all together to thank this great panel we've had today.
Thank you, Anthony. To you, this is just an example of how complex are these disciplines like R&D, education, and I agree with all of you. Story and people inspire young students, and we need a new narrative. And I think also it's quite important to integrate a lot of initiative like schools. We have a VSEC and Hamilton Secondary College. We have example of Questacon, and also in Adelaide next year, the Discovery Center. We have a seminar, workshop, that you, Vienna, is attend. But also, as a government this year, that was a richer idea. We start this space work experience. And with Sarah Baker, probably is here in the hall, we launched this initiative, and we received 100 applications from students year 8, 9, and 10, probably also 11. And then, of course, we created a short list, was, I think, 30, 35. And we start to call the company, like Mariota, Fleet, Innova. Could you have for 1 day, 2 days, this group of students? But it was amazing, because it's for these companies open the door. Please come to visit us, see, touch the CubeSat. What does mean CubeSat? Because sometimes we do mathematics, we don't know what is the end of the mathematics. So probably is the model of the mathematical approach is too far from year 8, year 9. But this initiative to create a bridge between industry and also university and year 8, year 9 year 10 student. It was a very great success story for us. But anyway, thank you very much for everybody here, and I think that we can invite for the afternoon tea.